This is Duke University.
It is my very great pleasure to introduce Fati Abubakar, who is a well-known documentary photographer who chronicles the lives of people in her home state of Borno in northern Nigeria in a time of rather profound political difficulty. She is a graduate of the University of Maiduguri in Nigeria and has a master's degree from London South Bank University in the United Kingdom. Her work has been featured in more publications than I can list, but they include the New York Times, BBC, Africa as a Country, Voice of America, Glamour, and many others. She has been commissioned to work with many international organizations, including UNICEF and the International Crisis Group. Her Instagram feed, Bits of Borno, has over 9,000 followers. Mine has 7, not 1,000, just 7. And as an artist and public intellectual, her work reaches audiences that others on the ground in Maiduguri, so to speak, can only dream of. Her images capture the lives of those who are left in the wake of an intransigent and violent insurgency by a group that calls itself Boko Haram. This is a conflict in which over 2 million people have been displaced and an unknown number of people have been killed. We haven't even begun to understand the political ramifications of this conflict for Africa's largest country, and the insurgency is far from being over. Boko Haram emerged in the early 2000s in northeastern Nigeria. Some argue as an outgrowth of a Islamic revivalist movement called Izala, while others see it as a purely political movement, one which gives a Salafist bent to what it does only for reasons of political expediency. What Boko Haram desires has never been very clear, but for the last 8 years it has been locked in a violent and largely futile confrontation with the Nigerian government and the multinational joint task force, a confrontation that has trampled over civilians but accomplished relatively little else. But this political story is only one that you could tell from Borno State today. And Fati Abubakar has made it her goal to document the forms of life that go on under the sign of insurgency and emergency, but which are not determined by it.
Maiduguri, where I was born and raised, is a very small town, and it was very peaceful prior to 2009 when we had an incident that resulted in a terrorist group attacking the community constantly for the past 8 years. And during that time I was in medical college. I was studying to be a nurse, and despite all that was happening, I was able to graduate in 2013. And then I was really depressed because of all that was happening within the community, and I decided to pursue a master's degree in the UK. And I went there in late 2013, and I started studying in London South Bank, and I was studying public health. That was where I was introduced to using media for health. And at the time that I was there as a student, it was a struggle for me because I was able to leave my community, but then I had a lot of guilt for being so privileged enough to leave the community. And I was bombarded with a lot of images from mainstream media about what was happening within the community. So a lot of images that we got were dead bodies on the street and just bomb blast sites, and it was just constantly numbers. 10,000 died, 5,000 died. I started talking to other students like myself who are from war-torn communities that come to the UK to study, and my dissertation focused on that. And I studied the psychological impact of war on refugee students that come to the UK. And during that time, I was interviewing a lot of students from Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, and I discovered the word resilience while I was documenting that and researching that. And resilience means that you are able to become stronger because of the adversity that you have faced. And if you did not have the conflict or something that trigger that resilience, it would be difficult for you to become a stronger human being. So I developed an interest in that, and I researched a lot about resilience. In the mainstream media, to be honest, had added to the issues I was having. I was clinically depressed at the time because of the images that I was having. I was getting from Facebook, from Twitter, and then when I call my mom and dad, they would tell me, oh, it's fine, it's not as bad as they say it. So for me, that one-dimensional reporting was also a problem. So I bought a camera, and when I returned after my master's degree, exactly what I had researched was what I saw within my community, which was the resilience. And that resilience had not been shown by mainstream media. A narrative had been created for my community, and then we had been reduced to numbers. So there was no face to the conflict. And for me, it was highly important that I ensure that people see the impact of war as well as the survivors of the conflict. I went around my community taking portraits of people and interviewing them and asking them questions. How are you coping in such a situation? How is life in Maiduguri is usually what I asked. And then people were, telling me all these profound stories. You would stop someone on the street and they would have an incredibly resilient story, but it was untold. Even if you're not in northeast Nigeria, you're able to see how people are coping in a conflict zone. And the response was incredible in the sense that because there were so many people that had left our community and had moved to other parts of Nigeria, it was bringing a lot of nostalgia. They were able to see what was happening beyond the breaking news. For me, it's important that everyday people have a voice and you're able to profile them in a humane, dignified manner. And the misrepresentations of Africa have really contributed in reducing northeast Nigeria to another Rwanda, unfortunately, like I mentioned. And so I insist when I photograph people that I photograph them in a way that I feel I should be photographed. There was a party that I was covering, and then when I posted it on social media, people were saying, why are you having a party? Why are you not focusing on the conflict? There's so much tragedy, but you're here having a party. And I said, it's been 8 years of hell. We need a party. These are things that I try to document, very untold stories, things that you wouldn't expect from a conflict zone, and things that the mainstream media does not focus on and does not sometimes want to focus on. So a lot of my images will have children in them, and I cover a lot of stories with children because it makes me happy as a photojournalist. Sometimes you need that uplift. And every Eid in our community, Eid is the Muslim holiday, and we have a curfew. The first day of Eid, nobody is allowed to go out, so we're all inside. But the next day, you're allowed to go out and dress up and visit family. So we have these barbecues, and children go to the zoo, and it's highly competitive in the zoo. People dress up to outshine each other. So I try to document a lot of that happiness, a lot of that bubbliness that children have. And the signature glasses that children wear during the zoo is what I focus on. And it's very colorful, as you can see from my dress. We're very colorful people, and I try to emphasize that in my photography. Like, despite all of that, we still insist on fashion and looking good. And that's one of the series from the Eid fashion series is what I call it. And I highlight, all of the things that we do during Eid. Well, this is one of the portraits I am doing on maternal mortality. A lot of the women who are fleeing the villages and coming to town are having to deliver their babies as they're walking 2 or 3 days to the new town where they are seeking solace. So we have a lot of issues with women not having access to healthcare, and I go to a lot of the health centers and I emphasize why there's a need for us to focus on health. And this was one of the antenatal clinics, and women were waiting to see a health professional. Because of the conflict, we have an unquantifiable number of unaccompanied minors, and we see them on the street. Unfortunately, we have too many street children in Maiduguri. Farming is big in Maiduguri, and cattle rearing is also one of the major businesses that we have. So during the conflict, all of the villages were destroyed, and people don't really have the ability to, engage in businesses that they used to. So for me, it was really important to highlight the fact that, despite all that has happened, there's still a huge cattle business in Maiduguri and people still go to the market. This is one of the images from a town called Goza. It's a very influential part of our state, and a lot of the intellectuals and politicians come from this town. So the terrorist group made it a priority actually to destroy this town, and when you go there, everything is destroyed. When I took this photo, there are about only 100 people, only elderly people and children still living in the community. So everything was destroyed, and the traditional ruler was killed as well. So for me, documenting all of these things are highly important, because in the future we might actually need to come to other places to get images and stories from our community because we did not document it. So I personally feel that I have to ensure that we have an archive of images, the bad, and the ugly, so that we don't have to go to the Getty images or the Smithsonian, etc. This is one of my favorite images because it was the first student party we had in 8 years. All of the student activities had stopped because of the conflict. So this year we had a local musician come to play for the student awards. So this was the party, and we were really excited, and I felt like this had to be covered because it's something we hadn't seen in such a long time. These are what the camps look like for a lot of the communities that are fleeing from the villages, and it's still part of my passion to ensure that I document everything, and everywhere I go I take whatever kind of pictures, even if it's not needed at the moment, but I feel like years from now we still have to see what has happened. This image was taken in one of the political powerhouses, we call it. It's a town called Bama in Maiduguri. It was made the caliphate of the terrorist group. Whatever town they destroy, they make sure they make it a caliphate, and they reside within the community, and some of the women are abducted and made slaves, etc. But when Bama was destroyed, it was just complete destruction of the town because of the simple fact that people within that community had rejected the ideology. So they ensured that they destroyed everything. I cover a lot of the elderly, and it's part of the series on aging in a crisis. A lot of the NGOs that come to Maiduguri only focus on women or children, and so we don't really see any kind of geriatric care. There aren't really NGOs specifically for the elderly, so I'm trying to highlight how important it is for us to focus on people that are older, that are affected by the conflict.
Your work made me think a lot about Susan Sontag and her documentation of another war, the Balkan Wars. And one of the things that she said about portraiture in a time of warfare is that the photographer's act of taking a photograph can be an act of violation, in that it presents the person in a way that they would never see themselves. So I'm wondering what you do in taking photographs to make sure that the people that you photograph are presented in a way that they would recognize themselves.
Well, that's what I said about, photographing people the way I would want to be photographed. When I go there, it's not as you go that, for me personally, I just don't go in and take an image. I have to be familiar with the family. I have to talk to them. I have to engage with them. It's like 70% of my work is talking to people, ensuring that they're comfortable enough for me to photograph in their environment. So I don't really just come in, which is why I don't really like the kind of international photographers that come in. I have problems with how our people are portrayed. You are only there for about 2 days. How do you engage with a community enough to photograph them with dignity? So for me, I have to keep going. I have to go to the family first. If they're not fine with it, I move to another person, and then I ensure always that they're comfortable. That's an important thing for me, because even when we're doing trainings, I always tell people consent is incredibly important, and the person has to know where the image is going and how they're portrayed and what you're going to say when you post their photograph. So I ensure I explain everything before I photograph, and I always ask them, how would you like a picture? So those things are very important to me, and I don't really like the parachuting in and out without any kind of engagement. Early 2013, there were a lot of abductions in Maiduguri, so my parents had insisted that we move to Abuja. So my sisters and my brothers and I moved to Abuja, and when I went there, it was like a different country. People did not care about what was happening in the north, and like I said in previous class, it's like your neighbor's house is on fire, but you're having a party. That was how it felt to me. And every day in Abuja, there would be a party because you bought a car. It was like they were in a different country. So I was struggling while I was there, trying to live there, knowing that there were problems at home. And unfortunately, that's how Nigeria is. And I've experienced a lot of that. Even when you're in Abuja, you're stigmatized because you're from Borno State. And there are all kinds of jokes about, oh, are you Boko Haram? Have you met any Boko Haram member? It's highly insensitive, the way they talk to you because you're from such a state. So I've experienced everything you can imagine. And the reason why I have it on social media is because of that. So even Nigerians who have not focused on it can see that this is the impact of what is happening within Nigeria. And fortunately, I was able to have an exhibition in Lagos, and we had a traveling exhibition, Maiduguri, Abuja, and Lagos, so people within that community can see that there are actual problems within Nigeria. And some came, and but like I said, people are in a bubble and they want to be in a bubble. They don't want to recognize that there are issues within Nigeria. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do as a single individual, but I think it's media organizations in Nigeria that should make it a priority to show Nigerians that there's an actual problem in the Northeast. Humans of New York was an inspiration in the beginning, but I've moved on from that kind of portraiture, and I would like to, in the beginning, Richard Sandler was actually one of my other inspirations because I saw his work in the subways in New York, and there was a lot of play with lighting and dark shadows, etc. So I'm exploring a lot of things in documentary. Covering some of the faces was because a lot of the women coming back from captivity were being stigmatized when they returned back to the community. So, and what we see when foreign journalists, for example, come is they photograph the woman's face. And this is the worst thing you can do to an individual who will face stigma. So for me, I wanted as much as I could to ensure that the story is told, but the privacy will be there. And that's my main problem with mainstream media. Unfortunately, there is a neglect of the culture. There's just cultural insensitivity. Like I said, they like the camera. So whenever you say, why don't you stand here, they're open to whatever will look good, so they get their shot. So a lot of it, to be honest, I'm obsessed with composition, and I want to ensure that the person is happy with their image. I know that's not the conventional way, but for me, portraiture can be. I'm open to whatever rules that I can make for myself. Archiving is a huge problem for us in Nigeria. I'm worried about just keeping them on Google Drive and then having a hard drive. Those are really risky for me, and I don't even know what exists outside of those things. So archiving is a problem. I have no expectations, to be honest. I just feel it's part of documentation and part of a story that needs to be told. After the New York Times article, for example, the audience became mostly Americans, and they always leave comments and they say thank you for showing us something that we don't see often. So the response has been really positive, and Africans, not as many as the internationals. So I would say I have more of an international audience. A lot of researchers, writers, so many different people, everyday people. They want to contribute, they want to donate, so it's been wonderful. Well, I'm open to exploring as many cultures as possible. I think a wider perspective is incredibly important, and I'm a curious, very adventurous person, so I would like to go everywhere. I do assignments with NGOs such as UNICEF, and then when you get money from that, you're able to, buy a camera, buy a printer. But unfortunately, grants are very difficult to get. It's highly competitive, so there hasn't been support, honestly, from any kind of organization. I've been doing it on my own. The exhibition that we had in Maiduguri was one of my proudest moments, because this is a community that is new to photography, but then they're starting to accept it. So it's like an introduction to the arts for our community. That was really what I was happy about. And we have other people that want to be photographers now. So that has been the highlight of my short career.